The Vauxhall Victor looked like Britain's answer to a question Detroit had already asked. It was chrome-trimmed, confident, slightly outrageous, and somehow still practical enough for ordinary families. But behind that familiar saloon shape lived a story of clever suspension, controversial marketing, export ambition, corrosion nightmares, and racing madness. Subscribe if classic cars still give you goosebumps. Today, we're digging into the strange details that made the Victor far more fascinating than people remember. The baby Chevrolet that Britain couldn't ignore? When the first Vauxhall Victor arrived in 1957, one of the most distinctive features was how unapologetically American it looked to British eyes. Its wraparound windscreen, chrome-heavy trim, modest tail fins and low sweeping stance felt less like Luton and more like a baby Chevrolet parked outside a semi-detached house. That was not an accident. General Motors wanted Vauxhall to project modernity, and the Victor borrowed the visual drama of Detroit without the giant size or giant fuel bill. The practical benefit was simple. It gave ordinary buyers a family saloon that felt glamorous and new, not merely sensible. In a Britain still shaking off post-war austerity, that mattered. The Victor did not just look different from its rivals. It made aspiration part of the ownership experience, and that helped define its character from the very beginning. The rust scandal that haunted the Victor. Yet beneath that stylish body was a problem that would cling to the Victor's name for years. Rust. Early cars, especially the F-Series, earned a grim reputation for corroding far too quickly in the damp British climate, where winter roads and wet air exposed every weakness in the metal and protection. On paper, the Victor was fresh, modern, and full of showroom sparkle. In real life, some owners discovered that the shine could fade into bubbling arches, tired sills, and structural worries sooner than expected. That made the car's greatest strength, its fashionable body, feel strangely fragile. The practical consequence was obvious. Appearance and resale value suffered. But the deeper damage was emotional. For many people, the Victor became a cautionary tale about how a car can win hearts quickly, then lose trust just as fast. The export car that accidentally invaded America. What makes the Victor even more fascinating is that it was never meant to be just a local British success. Vauxhall and General Motors pushed it into export markets across the Commonwealth and beyond, and for a brief moment, the Victor even found itself trying to charm buyers in North America. That sounds almost absurd now. A compact British saloon, modest in size and engine capacity, entering the land of broad highways and chrome battleships. But that was the hidden advantage. Its smaller footprint, lighter thirst, and tidy packaging gave GM dealers a useful alternative at a time when the American market was beginning to notice compact cars. In practical terms, it offered something different. In historical terms, it showed how ambitious Vauxhall had become, even if America was never truly ready to embrace it for long. The 101 improvements nobody fully trusted. By the time the FC arrived in 1964, Vauxhall knew the Victor needed more than a facelift, so it gave the car a bold promise and a memorable label. The Victor, 101, a name meant to suggest 101 improvements over the earlier model. That was clever marketing because it turned engineering revisions into a story customers could repeat. The car itself did feel more spacious and more modern, with cleaner lines, a broader cabin feel, and detail changes aimed at making it seem smarter and more grown up. The practical benefit was greater comfort and a more usable family saloon. But the number also revealed something deeper. Vauxhall was not merely selling a new car, it was trying to rebuild confidence, proving that the Victor could evolve beyond its flaws and become something customers could trust again. The slant-4 engine with a secret Lotus connection. One of the most remarkable engineering turns in the Victor story came with the FD generation and its unusual slant-four engine. Instead of standing upright like a conventional four-cylinder, the engine was laid over at about 45 degrees, a clever design that allowed a lower bonnet line and tidier packaging under the front end. That simple change gave the car a more modern profile, while also creating room for efficient intake and exhaust layout. Later, the engine gained an unexpected aura because Lotus used the Vauxhall slant-four architecture as a starting point while developing its own Lotus 900 series ideas. In practical terms, the Victor got compact but effective engineering. In emotional terms, it meant this ordinary family saloon had a hidden link to one of Britain's most respected performance names, which made it far more intriguing than it first appeared. The family saloon with race car bones. Look past the FD Victor's handsome Coke bottle styling, and you find another unusual detail. The chassis was far more serious than many people expected from a mid-range family car. Up front, it used independent suspension, while the rear kept a live axle but controlled it with trailing arms, coil springs, and a panhard rod. A surprisingly sophisticated solution compared with the leaf-sprung simplicity still common in many rivals. The simple explanation is that Vauxhall wanted a better blend of ride comfort and road holding. The practical result was a car that could feel composed, planted, and a little more confident through bends than its modest image suggested. That mattered on real British roads, where surfaces were rarely perfect. It also gave the Victor a hidden, dynamic edge, the sort of engineering that quietly made it stand out. Big Bertha, the Victor that became a monster. And then there was Big Bertha, the moment the Victor story stopped being merely interesting and became unforgettable. Built from the silhouette of a Vauxhall FE-based racer and associated with the wild world of super saloons, Big Bertha was fitted with a thunderous 5.0-litre Repco Holden Vive 8. And driven by Jerry Marshall, one of Britain's great touring car characters. The strange feature was obvious. This was no longer a polite family saloon. In spirit, only a Victor-shaped monster with brutal power and attitude. The practical benefit, if you can call it that, was sheer straight-line force and spectacular presence. But it also exposed the limits of the concept, because the car was famously heavy and difficult. That is exactly why it lingers in memory. Big Bertha turned the Victor's legacy from respectable to legendary. The Vauxhall Victor was more than a family saloon. It was a rolling contradiction of American glamour, British practicality, clever engineering, and unforgettable flaws. It could look stylish, rust badly, travel overseas, hide Lotus-linked thinking, and still leave behind a racing monster that sounded nothing like a polite Vauxhall. Click now to watch more stories about classic British cars. Like, subscribe, and tell us what you think of the Victor in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.